You're listening to the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast, episode 137. And this is 3 things that totally changed the way that I look at study, education, and assessment. I'm Katie Jones, and with over 15 years in education as an award-winning high school teacher, international external examiner, and as a study coach, I've helped thousands of students skyrocket their results and confidence. And this podcast is where I share all my insights, tactics, and tips with you, the parent, so you can help your hardworking teen get happy, smart, and successful in their study, and have you both enjoy the journey along the way. This is the Parents of Hardworking Teens podcast. Hey VIPs, how are you doing? I hope you and your teen are doing great. If they are on school holidays right now, depending on where you are, then I hope they're enjoying some fun and relaxation, or maybe some time getting their exam prep underway if they're in year 12 or 13. And if you're in the final week of term, then I hope that final assessment or exams are going well. On this episode, I want to share with you a few things that I have been thinking about and reflecting on since a conversation that I had recently that kind of drifted into how I got into this side of education and tutoring and coaching and being an external examiner and getting so involved with that side of things, with assessment, with exams, with external exam boards, and then using that to help students with strategy and technique rather than just tutoring them in subject content and teaching them the syllabus in the classroom. And it got me thinking about the moments that have led me here, because whenever I try to sort of explain this to someone, I end up just finding it easiest to tell them about some of the moments that I realized that these things were so important and that students didn't really know them, and that I realized that even as a successful teacher, I hadn't known them. And these are the things like exam technique, strategic ways to tackle open assignments, definitely something that I struggled with and didn't really have a clue about as a student. Things like essay topic versus focus that I teach a lot these days, and active revision and efficient and effective study. So we're not just kind of doing busy work that isn't necessarily effective. Again, something that I was very familiar with as a student, because I always wanted to work hard. So I always wanted to feel like I was doing something productive and putting in effort, working hard. But what I know now, and these are 3 things that have really shown me that it's these things like exam technique, like strategically tackling assessment, that mean subject knowledge, the thing that we tend to traditionally focus on, is actually converting into marks, into grades, into the results that match students' abilities and effort. And so after this conversation, I was kind of just reflecting on these things a little bit and thought you might find them helpful as well, either to help build that awareness and understanding of how all of this works, or maybe to help see where some of these things have or haven't clicked yet for your teen to be able to better support them, or just for a little bit of a behind the scenes snoop into the life of a teacher or examiner, and even, like I said, a little bit of reflection on me as a student. So what I'm going to do to stop this turning into like an hour-long episode, I'm going to share with you my top 3 summary here on this episode. And then I'm going to share the first of the moments in a little bit of detail, and I will then also share the other 2 in our upcoming episodes. And I do have a little request at the end as well that will hopefully help me to help you and your teen, and I guess give me a little bit of the behind the scenes of how things are looking your end, so that I can continue to deliver information and insights that are going to be helpful. So my top 3 moments that totally changed the way that I now look, and have done now for a number of years, look at study and assessment and education, and have altered the way that I teach, have drastically altered my focus outside of teaching in the classroom, and really moving towards that training and coaching students for success are, and this is in chronological order because I think it kind of adds to the way that these things have unfolded and built for me. They are, number 1, this was back in 2010, my first ever external exam marker training back in the UK. That was the first thing. That was the thing that sparked all of this. And I'm going to share more about that with you on this episode. Number 2, coming up in a future episode, is the Miss This Is Gold moment. You might have heard me mention this maybe on a webinar before. I have slipped it in here and there, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it and why it was so impactful, why it was so important. Honestly, that should have been the moment where I kind of got the inspiration or got the idea to create the 10-week grade transformation program, but that came a little bit later. I still didn't totally click in to just how important this stuff was, even with that Miss This Is Gold phrase being said to me from a student. So I will share more about that. That was from a year 11 lesson in Sydney. That would have been maybe around like 2011, 2012. And then my NAPLAN writing test exam marking. Now this was really important because as a non-English specialist, as in I'm not an English teacher, I will share a little bit more about how I got into ending up doing writing test exam marking, and also how it tied into the year 12 writing test marking that I did a few years after that. Because again, that gave me another angle of examinations and being an exam marker and seeing how all of this stuff worked, especially as someone who is not what I would consider myself as a natural writer. I am not someone who comes up with creative ideas. I am not someone who honestly ever really enjoyed English as a student. And I really started to see some of the areas of what it takes to be successful and how your team can be successful, even if they are also not a massive English or reading or writing enthusiast, as I also wasn't as a student. So those are the 3 moments that I'm going to share with you. And like I said, I'm going to go into that first moment here on this episode. And like I said, that was my first ever external exam marker training. So it was my 4th year of teaching. I feel like I should say, sit comfortably, go get a cuppa. Let's dive into this story. It's kind of going to be like that a little bit, this episode. But like I said, I definitely will have some takeaways for you at the end. But just for context as to why this was such a big deal was because I had a fair bit of experience under my belt by this time. Like I said, it was my 4th year of teaching. And so not maybe a lot of years, but I'd done quite a bit in those 4 years. I was head of department at that time. I had been a coursework marker. I'd done coursework moderation. I'd been a head of faculty for 1 year, the year before that. I'd had a few GCSE classes by this time and was getting good results with those students. I'd won a UK National Teaching Award. I had been rated outstanding in the school Ofsted inspection. Ofsted inspections are a big deal and they happen across the UK. You can go Google that if you want to look that up. It's not the most fun thing on a teacher's agenda, I can tell you that. And so I think I said this was back in the UK. I started with exam boards when I was teaching back in the UK. And it was literally the summer before I left for Australia. And I had applied to become an external exam marker because number 1, I had been curious about how exam marking and external exams worked right from my first year of proper full-time teaching. Because at the end of that first year of teaching, I had students that were in my GCSE class getting grades or getting results kind of a little bit lower than we were expecting in their final exams. And I also had a few students who were getting grades higher than they're expected in their final exams. And of course, that happens. Not every student gets exactly what their predicted mark or grade is. And it was my first year. So I was just kind of seeing this stuff happen for the first time. I was processing it. I was digesting it. I was reporting back on it. You also have to write up reports a lot back in England on the results and who got what and what can be learned from it. And then, of course, because these things happen, the same thing happened the next year. So I'm seeing these situations occur. I'm doing everything that I feel like I can to get my students the best marks and best results possible. I'm using all of the different teaching strategies. I'm differentiating. We're doing exam practice. We're doing revision. All the things that you need to be doing and think you need to be doing and trying to do to help those students do the best that they can. But I'm, along the way, reporting and reflecting and doing predicted grades and doing, marking practice tests and things like this. And I'm kind of getting curious about what really happens behind that exam curtain, behind the curtain of exam boards and how exams really get written and how they get marked and who writes them and whom decides what's going on the paper that year. I sort of literally had this vision in my head, like the Wizard of Oz, the original movie where they have that big curtain and then there's the big like machinery behind it, of the machinery almost being like the whole examination system and all the things that I love to talk about and share today. How those questions are written, the exact wording, the marking, the marks, how they're allocated, how they're marked, what happens. Anyway, fast forward, third year of teaching. This year, I had taken on the role of head of faculty, and it wasn't actually, I'll be honest, my favorite thing. I traded that to become head of department instead when the opportunity arose the year after, but you kind of get ushered into and made to think that you should be seeking out and taking on more roles of responsibility as a new and enthusiastic teacher. And you know me. A, enthusiastic, and B, always want to follow the rules. So that's what I did. And so another year passes because, I'm super busy doing loads of things. And there's another year of exam results, of GCSE results, another cohort of students go through. And, I'm really into everything by now. I had won a National Teaching Award by this time. That was in my second year of teaching. I was also one of those teachers that just got involved with and was helping out with or setting up clubs and extracurricular activities and all those sorts of things. I ran a trampoline club. I helped out with the Duke of Edinburgh. I had like this pen pal correspondence club thing going with a school in Madagascar. I co-ran the cheerleading and street dance groups. Oh, and I was also, for 1 year or 2 years, no, it must have been 1 year, I was involved with the university in the nearest city, became a trainee teacher professional mentor. Basically, I was pretty busy. I actually don't know how I did it when I think back to it now, but I loved it. And I was in a school where we had a really good crew of young and energetic and good, highly skilled teachers. So it was a really positive, really energetic environment to be in. Anyway, I got to my fourth year of teaching. I was head of department for geography. Yes, geography has its own department in the UK. It is a much more, should we say, major subject than it is here in Australia, but that is a conversation for another day. And so to satisfy that curiosity that I've been building year on year, and to tie in with my role, I guess, as a head of department, and to give myself some extra pocket money for that summer, I applied to become an external exam marker for the AQA exam board for the GCSE geography exams. Now, I will say, and I know I am biased, but I will say that geography just happens to be a brilliant subject to become a teacher and a head of department, but also an external examiner for, because across the board, it incorporates almost every skill. It covers all sorts of different types of questions in terms of multiple choice, short response, extended response. It includes skills-based questions in terms of map reading. It includes numeracy and data, whether that's statistical calculations or data analysis or identifying and explaining patterns and relationships in the data. It requires some scientific terminology and explanations for things like climate change or tectonics or for geology. And it also has that social aspect of humanities with reasoning, bias, decision-making. It also has source analysis, where you might have maybe a map, maybe a photograph, maybe even a cartoon, maybe some other stimulus item that has to be evaluated or compared or connected in some way. So I applied, I was accepted, I went to the training for that year's exam paper. Back then, you went in person. You went to the exam board headquarters and you'd have both the sort of general training in terms of examiner roles and responsibilities and rules you had to follow, but also the specifics, the nitty-gritty details of the actual paper you were marking and being trained in exactly how to mark every question on that paper. You'd have the specific questions broken down, the wording of them, the marks that were allocated or awarded to them, and of course, the mark scheme and how to apply it. Apply it accurately, apply it efficiently, apply it fairly. And applying that mark scheme and digging into that mark scheme was the first life-changing moment. And I will say life-changing because it was my very first experience of all this, and it is definitely what got me hooked on all things exams, figuring out how they work and how I can help students to navigate them and succeed in them. Because from then on, I took up as many exam and coursework and exam board opportunities as possible. And it has ultimately led me to where I am today, talking to you here on this podcast and setting up Rock Solid Study and creating trainings and programs and coaching to deliver the concepts, the strategies, and the skills that I have figured out and devised over the years to students and share the information that I'm totally allowed to share with parents, like I'm doing right now in this podcast and in my webinars and in my emails, and even delivering professional development to other teachers so that they get to know all of this without having to be an examiner themselves. Because I can tell you, there are a lot of teachers who really cannot think of anything worse than having to do a load more exam marking. Now, on that note, if you want to be getting my emails regularly, if you want to get my invites to webinars that I run, which are only a couple of times a year, then you need to get on my email list. And you can do that by requesting my free parent guide. It's on the Rock Solid Study website at www.rocksolidstudy.com/guide. And I'll also put a direct link to it with the episode resources that I'm going to put to go with this episode. And you'll be able to find that link in the show notes. So I'm sat in this big meeting room. We're going through every single question, every single dot point on the marking criteria, every single mark on the mark scheme. And to me, as someone who did really want to see how all of this works, I was loving it. I was lapping up every single part of it. To me, it was super interesting. But there was one particular moment that really struck me and has stuck with me ever since. And it was a question to do with, it was something like industry and urban challenges or something along those lines. And I really wish I'd kept this paper. There are lots of papers and things that I've kept over the years, but I guess at the time I didn't realize quite where this was all going to take me. I've even looked back on the AQA website to see if their past papers go back that far, and they don't. But anyway, it had this like sketch image of a scene which students had to use and refer to help them answer a question about the impacts of, it was like industrialization and heavy industry, that kind of thing. And this sketch was basically like the classic scene of like big factory chimneys with big clouds of smoke or steam. So air pollution. There was like this river running like sort of in the foreground, more like a little sort of stream, which I vividly remember had fish in it. Now, they might have been swimming fish, or they might have even been like dead floating fish, or I might be making that up. But I remember the fish because I remember how this tied into the mark scheme that went with it, which I'll get to in a second. But there were also like these kind of pools of shading on the water, which were obviously supposed to be some kind of pollutants that were running into the water. But that part was clearly alluding to water pollution, the impacts on the water quality or the wildlife or the river ecosystem. And then there were these like rolling hills in the background with this lovely scenery. So that was kind of getting at the issue of visual pollution. And basically, in hindsight, I can see that this was a great example of a question that is such a wonderful demonstration of exam technique because, let's face it, kind of half of the subject knowledge was already on the image. So it wasn't even like, have you learned and can you remember what all of the potential issues are with, let's say, industrialization, because it was there on the image. So here's the particular part of the question and the mark scheme that has stuck with me for all of these years, over 15 years. It was the question that was to do with analyzing the negative impacts of heavy industry. And of course, that was going to include pollution. And this is the key word here, pollution, because this was an extended response. So there was a leveled response style of mark scheme for the question. So let's say it was worth like 5 or 6 marks. I can't remember exactly, but it was something like that. So leveled response means it wasn't like name me 6 things and that gives you 6 marks, or give 5 impacts and that's your 5 marks or whatever. It was about the level of detail. It was about the connections that were being made. And one of those aspects of detail was the word pollution. In order to reach the higher band of criteria, in order to be considered detailed, the student had to state what type of pollution it was, i.e. water pollution or air pollution or soil pollution or noise pollution or whatever it was they were writing about. So even if they said there was pollution causing the fish to die, let's say, even though from that writing it is pretty clear that they are talking about water pollution, if they didn't specifically say water pollution in their answer, that was going to leave them stuck at the lower band of criteria. That was one of the deciding discriminators on what was considered a detailed response versus an appropriate response. And this is the thing, because these discriminators are not named. They are not listed on the mark scheme. You will very often say, it gives appropriate information or gives detailed descriptions, whatever it is, it will use those words, but it doesn't say what would be considered as appropriate, what would be considered as detailed. And this is the stuff that we get through marker training. This is why we spend days often doing marker training to be able to mark certain questions. And the reason that this really stood out to me was because it was something that I believed really every student answering that question in that kind of way, they would have known. If I'd have been able to sit them down and say, I can see here you're talking about fish being poisoned. What type of pollution would that be from? I think every one of them who'd written that would be able to tell me, that's water pollution. So all I could think of was, number one, how many of my students were losing marks, had lost marks in that question because they didn't write water or air or whatever pollution. And that, of course, didn't feel great. I actually kind of felt like a bit of a bad teacher, like I should have somehow known this and told them this, and maybe I'd sort of let them down in some way. And side note, this is just one of the reasons I believe every teacher should do external exam marking as part of their professional development sometime early on in their career. Even if it's just one time, even if they hate it and never want to do it again, because you learn so much from it. And the other thing that I was sat there thinking was, I've got to get back to the classroom and tell all of my students this. Like literally, I had this urge to just get in my car, get back to school and tell all of my students, hey, if you ever write the word pollution, you make sure you write what type of pollution it is that you are talking about. Air pollution, water pollution, whatever, even if it seems obvious. And of course, that is what I did, starting the very next day, back in class with every class, even to the year 7s. Because if they start doing this, rehearsing this now early on, that it's just going to be automatic for them once they get higher up into those higher year levels. Because this was just something that I could share within, 3 seconds. Every student would be able to do it, and think how many marks this would potentially get or save for those students in future. And of course, that was just one specific thing that was deemed a deciding discriminator, if you like, in taking a response from appropriate to detailed. It's not as if just because a student wrote water pollution, they were automatically going to get top marks. There were, of course, other parts of their response that had to match up and align with other criteria as well. But this was just one that stood out because it was such an example of students can totally do this. They have this ability, they have this knowledge. They just don't know that they need to do it. And that's what this episode, if you like, this example is all about. It's knowing that, number one, small things can make a big difference. Number two, knowing what those things are and how to do them, how to use them. And also not knowing what you don't know. Because up to that point, I didn't really know, honestly, how exam board mark schemes worked, how important the specific wording of the question is, what's considered detailed, what isn't, the nitty-gritty details of what makes an answer detailed versus appropriate, and how these things get decided and applied with students' answers. And I had been teaching for 4 years by this point. I'd won a National Teaching Award, I'd been a head of faculty, I was a head of department, I had been successful in improving student results in those GCSEs up till then. So I actually found it hard to believe, oh my gosh, how have I gone all this time and done all of this without knowing this stuff? Because this experience and digging deeper into this totally changed how I saw questions, how I built this stuff into what I taught, and of course, how I prep students for their exams and their coursework. And for your teen, this don't know what you don't know situation might be as general, if you like, as just not realizing and not knowing that exams are testing more than just subject knowledge. They're also testing your teen's ability to be able to apply that knowledge in the way that the question asks, the mark scheme demands, and to time limits. So therefore, just learning subject content isn't enough. That could be the thing that they don't know. Or it could be something much more specific, like not knowing that a compare command means that you must have both differences and similarities, or that those differences must be connected with what I call a trigger word, a contrast trigger word in them, like however or whereas, for it to actually get credit as a difference or a contrast. I literally shared an example of this just last week in an email. It was a clip from one of my group coaching calls with this exact situation in a past paper chemistry exam. So I'll pop a link to that video in the resources for this episode as well. So applying this to your teen and their study, have a think about where you and they can look for their own sort of epiphany moments, their turning point moments, where you or they might be seeing this happening in their study or their exams or their assessments. And it can kind of be the positive or the negative version of this. Although actually, in some ways, we could argue that both of these are positive if they give your teen the epiphany that this is about much more than learning just the subject content, and then they are able to take action on that and they have that awareness and they can do something about it. So what I mean by like a negative example is honestly what I see and hear regularly from students and from their parents. For example, when your teen knows that they have good subject knowledge and they have written what they think is a good answer in an exam, or what they think is a good essay, or what they think is a good response or piece for whatever the task or assignment is, but then they come out with a disappointing result. Not because they don't know the topic, but because they don't know how to effectively answer the question or respond to the essay title or tackle that assignment more strategically. Or a more positive example is where they have picked up maybe one or two of these strategies or concepts and they've used them and they've seen it pay off. One of my favorite examples of this is Campbell. Campbell is a student who went through my 10-week program. He was then doing group coaching. He then went on to continue doing group coaching, and his mum sent me an email that told me about him doing some sort of exam practice. He was in year 12 doing some exam practice in, I think it was like a tutorial group. It was maybe like a study group at school, or maybe it was even with another tutoring company, something like that, but it wasn't with me. And Selena, Campbell's mum, had emailed me to say that he had this like golden moment where they had been given a question. I think it was like a practice exam question or a past paper question. And Campbell had actually written the shortest response out of all of his classmates or group mates, and he got the highest mark. And that was because he was able to dissect the question, predict the mark scheme, and respond to it confidently, succinctly, but also with sophistication and at a high level, and essentially nailed the marks. It's basically what I call like the ultimate in exam technique, getting maximum marks in the least words, being able to write or respond at the level required with the information that's required, but without writing more than you need to. So I would really love to hear your real life moments like this, your kind of epiphany moments, your teen's epiphany moments. What was maybe a task or a result or a situation where your teen realized, there must be more going on here, or I see what's going on here, or even just made them stop and question what is going on here. I always remember, I'll keep this very short, I always remember a student, Maxine, her and her mum, Natalie, they were sharing some feedback after she'd been through the 10-week Great Transformation Program. And I remember Maxine telling me she'd had a business studies exam and she'd gotten a 45. And now Maxine is a smart student. She's a hard worker. She had spent hours revising for that exam. And she literally said, she's like, oh my gosh, I was so upset. I'll tell you, I'll share a link to this video as well. So you can go and see this. Again, I'll pop it in the resources. So any resources for an episode, www.rocksolidstudy.com/ the number of the episode. So this will be 137. Anyway, she was like, oh my gosh, I was so upset. And her mum, Natalie, said that was the moment that they realized just doing all of the revision was not enough. They knew that there must be more to this, and that's how they kind of ended up, I guess, Googling and coming across, I'm not sure, I can't remember how they came across it, but coming across this work, coming across this training and these skills. And Maxine literally in her next exam, after getting that training, after getting these skills, got an 85 in her next business studies exam. So, as you can tell, I really love to hear about these stories and hear the real life situations that you and your teens are seeing and facing and experiencing. So I would love for you to share these with me. You can email support@rocksolidstudy.com and I will reply personally. And if I can help in some way by maybe sharing some information, directing you to a resource or whatever it might be, then I absolutely will. And I love to use this sort of information to inform my future trainings and webinars and these episodes to be able to provide you with more of the information that is helpful to you and your teen. So I would love to hear from you. And until next week, have a wonderful week and I'll catch up with you soon. Bye. If you're ready to have your teen achieve their best possible results with less stress, then I want to invite you to enroll them in the 10-week Grade Transformation Program, where they're going to learn the key concepts, skills, and strategies to catapult their performance in assessments and exams. It's risk-free. They either achieve bigger and better results with a whole lot more confidence in 10 weeks, or we refund you in full. Just head over to www.rocksolidstudy.com/program and I'll see you there.